And over the past year, we have seen a wave of protests and demands from civil society to their leaders, to us here in the room, to react to the facts and take action. The voices of the youth have been particularly forceful in driving this social wave of engagement and concern forward. They are asking for true leadership in this time of global crisis. I think it is time that we listen and that we act. I am appointed to be the high-level climate champion for UNFCCC. What does it mean? It means that I have been asked by the parties to UNFCCC to catalyze action among non-party stakeholders, to build bridges between the political process in UNFCCC and climate actors that we now see engaging all countries and across all sectors. And in this time of crisis, I am happy to come with some good news. In the 2019 edition of the Yearbook of Global Climate Action, we find that if all current NDCs are fully implemented, and if all commitments by non-party stakeholders are delivered and do not displace emission reduction elsewhere, we would actually reach the 2-degree target. But let me say that this requirement that we all step up and do want, we have promised to do so, parties and non-party stakeholders all together. And frankly speaking, we are not seeing that happening right now. And it does not take us to the 1.5 degrees, which is what we really need. Every fraction of a degree of climate change has disastrous effect on our planet, on our society, and on us. This is why we're not sitting in a high-level event on climate change, but in an event on the climate emergency. Only the other day, more than 500,000 people walked in the climate protest here in Madrid. They were asking for us, the decision makers here in COP, to get down to action. They were asking for us to move from negotiation to implementation of the Paris Agreement. They asked us to lead. So let us do just that. Thank you very much. So now I would like to invite to take the lecture to Mr. Johan Rostrum, Director of the Postum Institute of Climate Studies.
So dear delegates, this is a voice and update from science, and it goes very much in line to justify and support what Gonzalez just pointed out. Let me start by being very clear. The red thread in science over the last 20 years is that we have underestimated the pace of change, and we have underestimated the risks we're facing. 20 years ago, the IPCC estimated that catastrophic risks, like destabilizing the Greenland ice sheet, could only occur at 5 to 6 degrees Celsius warming. Today, science concludes that the risk of triggering large-scale discontinuities is reached already at 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, and IPCC now concludes in its most recent report that West Antarctica may already have passed a tipping point, committing all future generations to an additional 2-meter sea level rise. This, dear friends, is the new risk landscape. We're following a path that takes us to 3 to 4 degrees Celsius warming in only 80 years, when your children have grown-up children. A place the planet has not been for the past 4 million years. In fact, the latest climate modeling shows that over the past 3 million years, the average temperature on Earth has never exceeded 2 degrees Celsius, compared to the average pre-industrial temperature. 3 million years and never above 2. This provides ample scientific proof that your legally binding global decision in Paris 2015 is entirely aligned with science. Go beyond 1.5 and we enter a severe danger zone. This is our planetary boundary for a safe and just future for humanity on Earth. Exceed 2 degrees Celsius and we risk passing a planetary tipping point that pushes us along an unstoppable Earth trajectory towards a hothouse Earth, where Earth itself self-amplifies warming due to losses in nature's capacity to take up carbon, permafrost thawing, forest loss, evidence we're seeing in every day of scientific publications, pushing us well beyond what we have caused through our fossil fuel burning and land use change. The planet would be taking over. 2019 is not only another dark year in terms of global warming, the past 5 years being the warmest on record, and climate impacts, droughts, floods, fires, heat waves, hitting societies and communities across the world. The latest data is staggering. Between 1999 and 2018, about 495,000 people died from direct results of the more than now 12,000 recorded extreme weather events, accelerated and amplified by our anthropogenic global warming, causing losses over the same time period of over $3.5 trillion US. No, 2019 is also unique in terms of the advancements, unequivocal scientific evidence. Gonzalo's made reference to this. We stand on unprecedented mountain of proof. Through the IPCC special reports on land, oceans, the IPBES global assessment, the WMO-led United in Science report, which was presented at Antonio Guterres' Climate Summit in September. And then we have the 10 new insights in climate science that we presented earlier this week to all the delegates here in Madrid with the must-knows in science over the past year. 2 weeks ago, we even showed in the prestigious scientific journal Nature that 9 out of the 15 known tipping elements that regulates the state of the planet are on the move, and that they are interconnected and can trigger uncontrolled domino effects. Accelerated Arctic warming, we saw the latest report just yesterday, and Greenland melting drives influx of fresh water into the North Atlantic. This may have contributed to a 15% slowdown of the circulation of heat in the North Atlantic. This slowdown can destabilize the West African monsoon, triggering droughts in African Sahel region, affecting millions of people. But it can also dry out the Amazon. It can also disrupt the East Asian monsoon and cause a heat build-up in the Southern Ocean, which can explain the acceleration of the ice melt in Antarctica. We live in an interconnected system on the move. There's no feasible IPCC scenario, as you all know, that can take us to 1.5 degrees Celsius warming without bending the global curve of emissions 2020. The Global Carbon Project 2019, released earlier in this week here in Madrid, shows that global emissions continue growing. The remaining budget of allowable CO2 emissions for a chance to limit warming to 1.5 is now down to 340 billion tons of carbon dioxide. You know, this corresponds to 8 years of continued emissions at current pace. We enter the decisive decade. Current assessments show that just the existing and almost 600 gigawatts of new coal-fired plants planned or under construction in the world will on their own consume essentially the entirety of this budget. So coal alone can push us beyond the Paris limit. But even phasing out fossil fuels will not be enough. Oh no, IPCC scenarios are very clear. To take us well below 2, we need to also safeguard and keep all the natural ecosystems intact. We need to have very good carbon sequestration. If nature fails, we fail as well. The mounting evidence that we are facing catastrophic risks and that we're running out of time provides scientific justification for declaring a state of planetary emergency. This has been discussed among 8 heads of state at the UN Climate Summit, including Frans Timmermans, the now Executive Vice Chair of the European Commission. We will push this scientifically towards the UN General Assembly in 2020. What's the purpose? To create panic? Of course not. It is to unleash transformation and an emergence plan towards a safe and just climate future. We have this plan. The scientific community has presented an exponential roadmap showing that we can bend the global curve of emissions 2020 and cut emissions by half by 2030 with existing technologies and the current economy. We can, and the window is open, but barely. It's time to act. Thank you very much.
Johan. Thank you very much, Johan. And now it's my honor to introduce and give the lecture to Her Excellency Teresa Rivera, Minister of the Ecological Transformation of Spain.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy and honored to join you in this discussion. I think that this is a fantastic panel where we hear the voice of science loud and clear, where we hear the voice of the society, of concerned people being represented both by NGOs, activists that have worked for decades, trying to push this agenda forward, and the voice of youth, people that come up and say, hey, this is enough. And I think that this is a very, very important message. It is a very important message at the time that the COP opens a new cycle of implementation, action, ambition. These are the three words that we hear the most. A COP that, in order to be credible, needs to show to what extent we are guided by what it has already been agreed, the most popular word this year, which is climate emergency. We are in front of an emergency, and we should be guided by that, acting as far, as deep, as fast as we are able to do. Because as Johan was saying, what we have done is to underestimate on the science side what the impacts could be, and we underestimated what on the social side could be the social concern and the social impacts, the unfairness, the vulnerability of the lack of action. So it's quite reassuring to have this with us, because sometimes what we have felt along the years is that the voices that were heard the most were those asking for more time, not to be too fast, to delay action because of whatever organizational needs in order to avoid fearing the transformation that we needed to put in place. We all need to act, but the capacity we've got is very, very, very different. And we holding responsibilities in public institutions should be the ones to make it possible here in science, paying attention to people, paying attention what it should be considered the public interest to facilitate the combination of measures, policies, distributional effects that not taking action or taking action could have when dealing with climate. I think that there is no doubt on science, no doubt on what we need to do, no doubt on the political official engagement. Do you think so? Is there a doubt, or there is no doubt? Do you remember what happened with the Paris Agreement? Everybody came in to sign in so quickly, so fast, that we were all very happy. And now when trying to think what does it mean, what is this increasing gap, what does this increasing gap from what we agreed to do and what we are doing, we come back to the previous consideration. Why, if there has been an official engagement, we have not been able to do things that we promised to do? And this is where we need to fix our position. We should not accept any type of withdrawal. We should not accept any type of silence on the commitment. We know that inertia is also a relevant principle, and things are not easy to be changed, but we need to change things. We cannot stay accepting because of the difficulty, the lack of action, or no change at all. I think that this goes beyond the COP venue. The COP venue is very important because something that it is being challenged is the rule-based international order. And we need the multilateralism, the global cooperation in order to face global challenges. So we need to ensure this complicated bureaucratic process that enables a further capacity to act together. But action and ambition should not remain just blocked within these walls. We need action and ambition everywhere. We need action and ambition at the international level in other venues, finance, energy cooperation, innovation, science, capacity to observe our planet and to understand where the main causes of the problems that we are facing come from. And we need action also at the domestic agenda, every single domestic agenda. We cannot hide behind the international community to say we are not going to take measures at home. Transportation, energy, urban planning, education, health. There are so many things at stake that we need to generalize climate action everywhere. It's not anymore a question of ambition. It's a question of need, simple need, common need to act. And citizens, especially youth, coming up to the street saying, hey, this is not a storytelling thing. This is something that we demand as a right, as a need for survival. It's quite a strong voice. And making your own message, being part and echoing the message of science is quite powerful. I think that you are hopeful examples of this transformative power of people thinking in the very emotional aspects of our life, our family, our children, our grandchildren, asking for being serious on that. And we count on you all. We count on the society. We need you. We need you to make things happen faster. On the political intelligence, to do it properly at home, paying attention to the social concerns, but also to the fairness concerns. And I could not renounce to our common goal, our goal that was already fixed, set, signed, and accepted by everyone. The first international treaty entering into force in less than, 1 year and a half. So please, let's stay together. Let's push for more, and let's identify and name and shame those who feel the fear to do more. So to understand if it is fair and they need solidarity and help to do more, or if it is just not willing to do anything or anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now I would like to invite to take the floor to my friend Jennifer Morgan, Executive Director for Greenpeace.
Good morning. So I've been taking part in these COPs for 25 years. And I've never seen the divide between what's happening on the inside of these walls and what's happening on the outside so large. For a quarter of a century, I've been coming to these events to urge policymakers to listen to the science, to find a way for the world to work together on what I thought and still think is a solvable crisis, and to shine a light on the nefarious self-interests that pollute our planet. But clearly they were not listening. And now we are in different times. The impacts are happening all around us, coming up harder and faster than we ever imagined would be the case, and happening already in 2019. There is an extraordinary groundswell of awareness and youth and people power that is present in a way that we have never seen before. The solutions are affordable and right in front of our faces. But where are the champions? Where are the leaders? And where are the adults in the room? Frankly, I'm angry, and I'm tired of hearing from leaders and governments and negotiators of all the different things they cannot do, especially when it's so darn straightforward. If political leaders were responding in a way commensurate with the science that they know, the facts that have been laid out by scientists for decades, and acting with the level of determination and the human ingenuity and the morality needed, well, what would they be doing? Well, they would bring together the top brains across their society to develop socially just climate policy and actions to phase out fossil fuel and deforestation. And then they would put them into law immediately, backing up these climate emergency declarations with climate emergency laws, a set of emergency measures that drive down emissions at the pace and scale needed to stay in the 1.5 climate budget. They would regulate the financial sector to take into account the climate risks and make sure banks are no longer funding fossil fuels and deforestation. They would ensure that any climate policy is paid for by those who can afford it, and not those who are struggling to make ends meet. They would stop listening to the carbon major corporations that are all around these buildings, as you know, and they would start listening to the voices of their children all around the world. And they would make sure that the carbon majors pay for the damages occurring, the devastation of the lost homes of families, and you know what? They would show up for those people who have lost loved ones. And they would act as if their house was on fire, just as Greta has asked them to. But they aren't yet. So how can that be? It's just incomprehensible. It is true that we are living in dark climate politics days. There are shadows that lurk behind the curtains. The billions of dollars of the fossil fuel industry lobbying, making people fat and corrupt as they condemn the world and all its beauty and diversity to devastation. But I have not given up hope. Even after 25 years coming to these things, I have not given up hope that humanity can and will find a way forward and a way out. Because if I did, it would mean that I'd given up on humanity itself, and I am not ready to do that. So let's stop this here and now. We can stop this here and now at this COP. There can be a signal that this is going to change. Optimally, a decision that mirrors the UN Secretary General's call to action. A decision that has science as its guiding light, recognizes the urgency and declares a climate emergency. Leaders should have come here already with stronger targets and commitments. I mean, they should be here announcing what they're doing more. So the least they can do is come and commit to increase those targets in Glasgow next year, where they have to agree a climate pact, a global Green Deal that protects human rights and puts people and the planet at its center. The heart of the Paris Agreement is still beating, but barely. Don't give up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Now I would like to invite to stage to take the lecture to Mrs. Greta Thunberg.
Hi. A year and a half ago, I didn't speak to anyone unless I really had to. But then I found a reason to speak. Since then, I've given many speeches and learned that when you talk in public, you should start with something personal or emotional to get everyone's attention. Say things like, "Our house is on fire," "I want you to panic," or "How dare you?" But today I will not do that, because then those phrases are all that people focus on. They don't remember the facts, the very reason why I say those things in the first place. We no longer have time to leave out the science. For about a year, I have been constantly talking about our rapidly declining carbon budgets over and over again. But since that is still being ignored, I will just keep repeating it. In Chapter 2, on page 108 in the SR 1.5 IPCC report that came out last year, it says that if we are to have a 67% chance of limiting the global temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees Celsius, we had on January 1st, 2018, 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit in that budget. And of course, that number is much lower today, as we emit about 42 gigatons of CO2 every year, including land use. With today's emissions levels, that remaining budget will be gone within about 8 years. These numbers aren't anyone's opinions or political views. This is the current best available science. Though many scientists suggest these figures are too moderate, these are the ones that have been accepted through the IPCC. And please note that these figures are global and therefore do not say anything about the aspect of equity, which is absolutely essential to make the Paris Agreement work on a global scale. That means that richer countries need to do their fair share and get down to real zero emissions much faster, and then help poorer countries do the same, so people in less fortunate parts of the world can raise their living standards. These numbers also don't include most feedback loops, non-linear tipping points, or additional warming hidden by toxic air pollution. Most models assume, however, that future generations will somehow be able to suck hundreds of billions of tons of CO2 out of the air with technologies that do not exist in the scale required and maybe never will. The approximate 67% chance budget is the one with the highest odds given by the IPCC. And now we have less than 340 gigatons of CO2 left to emit in that budget to share fairly. And why is it so important to stay below 1.5 degrees? Because even at 1 degree, people are dying from the climate crisis. Because that is what the United Science calls for, to avoid destabilizing the climate, so that we have the best possible chance to avoid setting off irreversible chain reactions, such as melting glaciers, polar ice, and thawing Arctic permafrost. Every fraction of a degree matters. So there it is again. This is my message. This is what I want you to focus on. So please tell me, how do you react to these numbers without feeling at least some level of panic? How do you respond to the fact that basically nothing is being done about this without feeling the slightest bit of anger? And how do you communicate this without sounding alarmist? I would really like to know. Since the Paris Agreement, global banks have invested $1.9 trillion in fossil fuels. 100 companies are responsible for 71% of global emissions. The G20 countries account for almost 80% of total emissions. The richest 10% of the world's population produce half of our CO2 emissions, while the poorest 50% account for just 1/10. We indeed have some work to do, but some more than others. Recently, a handful of rich countries pledged to reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases by so and so many percent by this or that date, or to become climate neutral or net zero in so and so many years. This may sound impressive at first glance, but even though the intentions may be good, this is not leadership. This is not leading, this is misleading. Because most of these pledges do not include aviation, shipping, and imported and exported goods in consumption. They do, however, include the possibility of countries to offset their emissions elsewhere. These pledges don't include the immediate yearly reduction rates needed for wealthy countries, which is necessary to stay within the remaining tiny budget. 0 in 2050 means nothing if high emission continues even for a few years, then the remaining budget will be gone. Without seeing the full picture, we will not solve this crisis. Finding holistic solutions is what the COP should be all about. But instead, it seems to have turned into some kind of opportunity for countries to negotiate loopholes and to avoid raising their ambition. Countries are finding clever ways around having to take real action, like double counting emissions reductions and moving their emissions overseas, and walking back on their promises to increase ambition, or refusing to pay for solutions or loss and damage. This has to stop. What we need is real, drastic emission cuts at the source. But of course, just reducing emissions is not enough. Our greenhouse gas emissions has to stop. To stay below 1.5 degrees, we need to keep the carbon in the ground. Only setting up distant dates and saying things which give the impression of that action is underway will most likely do more harm than good, because the changes required are still nowhere in sight. The politics needed does not exist today, despite what you might hear from world leaders. And I still believe that the biggest danger is not inaction. The real danger is when politicians and CEOs are making it look like real action is happening when, in fact, almost nothing is being done apart from clever accounting and creative PR. I have been fortunate enough to be able to travel around the world. And my experience is that the lack of awareness is the same everywhere, not the least amongst those elected to lead us. There is no sense of urgency whatsoever. Our leaders are not behaving as if we were in an emergency. In an emergency, you change your behavior. If there is a child standing in the middle of the road and cars are coming at full speed, you don't look away because it's too uncomfortable. You immediately run out and rescue that child. And without that sense of urgency, how can we, the people, understand that we are facing a real crisis? And if the people are not fully aware of what is going on, then they will not put pressure on the people in power to act. And without pressure from the people, our leaders can get away with basically not doing anything, which is where we are now. And around it goes. In just 3 weeks, we will enter a new decade. A decade that will define our future. Right now, we are desperate for any sign of hope. Well, I'm telling you, there is hope. I have seen it. But it does not come from the governments or corporations. It comes from the people. The people who have been unaware but are now starting to wake up. And once we become aware, we change. People can change. People are ready for change. And that is the hope, because we have democracy. And democracy is happening all the time, not just on election day, but every second and every hour. It is public opinion that runs the free world. In fact, every great change throughout history has come from the people. We do not have to wait. We can start the change right now. We, the people. Thank you.
Jennifer, bring that chair closer, please. No, the chair. Bring the chair. Thank you very much, Greta. Now I would like my friend, His Excellency Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, Minister of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica, if you can please join us taking the lecture. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Gonzalo.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo.
Day. My name is Carlos Manuel Rodriguez. I'm the Minister of Environment and Energy of the government of Costa Rica. As you can all understand, the daily work of a minister like me is extremely busy. Some days are very exciting, some days are very sad, and even some days are very boring. But I normally do two things that are very, very important to me. One is the early morning run, and then the late dinner conversation with the most beautiful wife in the world and my four kids. My four kids, 2 girls, 2 boys, in between 16 and 24. That dinner conversation has been turning very interesting in my home because my kid has been reading a lot of information, reading the findings of IPBES, reading IPCC reports, and many other issues around, the state of the planet and the challenges that we have in front of us. Every day, the questions from my kids are becoming a headache to me. I'm unable to answer many of the questions and respond properly to my kids to many of their questions. 4 weeks ago, we had a great conversation about the fact that we don't need to invent a carbon absorption machine when we have nature and forests and trees. 3 weeks ago, the conversation was around how many mammals are there in the planet. Do you know that 96% of the mammals of these planets are humans, cows, horses, pigs, and chickens, and just 4% of the mammals of these planets are wild animals? The latest conversation I had with my kids was around conservation and restoration. I asked them, what do you want to do when you grow up? And they said, well, I want to be a conservationist like you, Dad. But one of my kids, the younger one, Elena, she said, no, I don't want to work in conservation. I want to work in ecological restoration because that will be the future of my generation, ecological restoration. Even though I believe deep in my heart that I'm a rebel, environmental hippie from Costa Rica, my kids see me as part of the establishment. I represent the establishment. I represent the adults. Today, I want to chair a panel that reflects what I have every single night I'm at home, that discussion with my kids, the discussion within the youth, the young leaders, and the policymakers, the decision makers, and I want to introduce them and ask them to join us over here. So thank you, Gonzalo.
Thank you very much, Carlos Manuel. We will be leaving the floor and the stage and leave you here, Greta, with Minister Rodriguez. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Johan. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Minister. So I would like to ask and join us up here in the front, Mr. Axel van Trotsenburg, Managing Director of the World Bank. Also, I would like, Greta, you can stay here. Okay. Elena Brandon, Head of International Relations from the European Commission. Please join us over here. Hilda Flavia, a young leader from Uganda. Freddie Melina, representative from the Aymara community, and Jacqueline Avila, director from the Council of Women from Chile, Licananti. Please join us over here. Thank you. Thank you all. So, thanks for being here and joining us. And my first question is to Hilda. You know, Hilda, we heard the statements by Greta, by Johan, one of the top scientists in this planet, talking, reminding us that there are boundaries in this planet, and the minister. And we talk about this environmental crisis and emergency. Can you tell us, in your own experience and words, why is this climate, why we have this emergency, and what do you see in Uganda? You got a microphone in front of you.
Thank you. First of all, I am happy to be here because I am among the few young people who made it from the global south. I do not understand why the most affected countries are always underrepresented. Government officials are, of course, very many because they follow the huge allowances that come with such meetings. I do not know. I did not come here for any allowance, and I don't expect any. I came here to represent millions of African young people who are bearing the brunt of climate crisis. I am here to speak for all generations to come. As I speak to you right now, extreme weather events are killing people in my country. I'm very disturbed that Western media is silent on the climate emergency happening in Uganda and the whole of East African region. I am the voice of the dying children, displaced women, and people suffering at the hands of climate crisis created by rich countries. Voices from the global south deserve to be heard. Animals, forests, fish, and birds from Africa may not count to you as they do to us, but at least make us count. We are humans who do not deserve to suffer a crisis that we did not create. The British named my country the Pearl of Africa, and I've been dreaming of seeing the meaning of this. But every day that passes, our rainforests are cleared, clean air polluted, and wildlife attacked. Climate injustice forced me to risk my education and fight for everyone. I rather fail my exams than fail my generation. You should understand what we pass through every day. African climate activists are determined to continue fighting for climate justice even when no one cares to pay attention. Our interest is not in attention, but action from leaders and everyone. What will I tell my next generation if they ask me where I was and what I did when nature was being destroyed by selfish and greedy individuals? Stop being self-centered and treat all lives equal. Why are we acting as if we still have time? We all talk of climate emergency, but we don't act like there's any. Dear leaders, we need leadership on climate action, not talks. For how long will you keep negotiating? You've been negotiating for the last 25 years, even before I was born. Do you want the whole Africa to first perish before you start acting? Do you even care if we all drowned in floods? If you don't know how to resurrect a dead person, then why are you polluting us with toxic air? If you can't bring back forests that once grew where there is now a desert, why are you backing timber business in Gabon? I will end with a quote from Suzuki. He said, "If you don't know how to fix it, please stop breaking it." Every Friday, we continue to go on the streets and strike for our future. We do not end on that. Me and my friends in my country and other countries in the global south and other countries around the world continue to do what we can do best to fight for our future. I engage in a lakeshore cleanup activity on the second largest freshwater lake we have in our country and in the world. And I do this with all my heart and with love for the coming generation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hilda. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good. Axel, people calling for a climate emergency distrust the establishment. Why should young people today look at us at this panel, ministers and leaders from international entities, the private sector, like the World Bank, and trust you and me?
Well, I think nobody needs to trust somebody just by talking. I think trust has to be established, that you have to be credible and to act. And I think that the challenge of a development organization like the World Bank is to focus on poverty. And there is still enormous extreme poverty, namely about 800 million. And there are more poor people who are maybe not extreme poor, but are poor. And the big risk is that climate change risks to throw more and more people into poverty, and not in Western Europe, and not in the United States, but as Hilda said, in Africa and in other countries. And that's unacceptable. And that's the reason why we need to act. Now, indeed, I agree that people are getting sick and tired of all the speeches and the announcements and no money and no action. So the World Bank publishes a lot on climate. And we have also dramatic title, Turning Down the Heat, etc. And that may be good to create more awareness. But at the end of the day, the people who are living and being affected, be it in the Pacific Islands, or in Africa, or in Bangladesh, they don't care about that publication. They care, are you going to do programs? And that is what we have been fighting for, particularly with a focus on Africa. And over the last couple of years, we have basically been able to double our commitments there. And we are talking about a 3-year program of about $50 billion. And it is still not enough, because the international community has to do more. You can do it alone, but in the end, it can only be done by all. And that requires much more international solidarity, less talk, and then when we are declaring solidarity, real help. And this is maybe one of the frustrations for many people in Africa or in Bangladesh or elsewhere, that they feel let down by the speeches and lack of action. And I think they're right. They're completely right. And so what we have to do is fight more for this. And certainly, I don't want to be seen as an organization, say, well, the others are not doing, therefore I don't need to do anything. In the end, you have to take your responsibility, and every organization, every person has to take that personally and fight for that. And that's what we are doing. I don't think that we are perfect, but I think what we have to do it is with community participation. It is not the project that you do only with the government. You need the NGOs in it. You need also the private sector there, because the task is enormous and they will have to participate. It is at the end of the day a call to everybody. And I think that is our challenge, and we have to be impatient. Impatient to act, and impatient to basically postpone the next decision. And at the same time, when we are talking about crisis, and particularly when they are affected, we have to act immediately. We have at least established crisis response mechanisms that allow us to act immediately, and that is important, particularly when you are thinking of people living in the small island states in the Pacific or the Caribbean. When a hurricane or a cyclone hits, the damage is not a couple of